The small gray scout ship of the Valaxians hovered silently above Earth's atmosphere. Inside, blue-skinned aliens with large, almond-shaped eyes studied their monitors with growing interest. Their ship had detected unusual energy patterns from this blue planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy. Commander Zixtal moved closer to the main viewing screen. His long fingers tapped against the smooth surface of the control panel. Fascinating. This species has achieved space travel, yet most of their technology is still remarkably primitive. Should we move on, Commander? Asked Officer Mechnar. There are more advanced worlds in the next system. No, said Zixtal firmly. There is something unusual about these beings. They call themselves humans. I want to observe them longer. The ship descended lower, activating its cloaking shield. No human eye could see them now, no radar could detect them. They were perfect observers. Thousands of miles below, John Miller woke up in his small cabin at Yellowstone National Park. The morning sunlight filtered through his window as he stretched and climbed out of bed. At 35 years old, John had been a park ranger for over 10 years. He loved the peace of the forest and the challenge of protecting it. John went through his morning routine. He showered, made coffee using his electric coffee maker, checked the weather on his phone, and put on his ranger uniform. Before heading out, he packed his bag with essential gear: GPS device, radio, first aid kit, multi-tool, water filter, and energy bars. Another beautiful day, John said to himself as he stepped outside. The air was crisp and clean. Birds sang in the tall pine trees around his cabin. He got into his ranger jeep and drove down the dirt road toward the trail he would patrol today. Above the park, the Valaxians observed with their advanced equipment. They could zoom in on any human they chose, listen to conversations, and even measure body temperature and heart rate from orbit. Look at how dependent they are on their devices, said Niravex, the lead scientist. She pointed to John's jeep. They require powered vehicles to travel even short distances. And look at all the tools they carry. The aliens watched as John stopped his jeep at a trailhead. They observed as he checked his GPS, spoke briefly into his radio to confirm his location with park headquarters, and then began his hike along the trail. These humans seem physically capable, noted Trelcon, the youngest researcher on board, yet they rely on artificial navigation aids even though they appear to have functional eyes and spatial awareness. Throughout the day, the Valaxians watched not just John but humans all across the planet. They saw people in cities using phones to find directions, cooking food in microwave ovens, traveling in cars and planes, and constantly checking devices for information. That evening, as John returned to his cabin, the Valaxian High Council gathered. For a virtual meeting, Commander Zixtal presented their findings. The species shows remarkable ingenuity in creating tools, but they have grown completely dependent on them. We believe humans would not survive without their technology. They have lost the natural abilities their ancestors must have possessed. The High Counselor, an ancient Valaxian with deep purple skin, leaned forward in interest. This warrants further study. What do you propose, Commander? An experiment, replied Zixtal. We select a human specimen and observe them without access to any of their technology. We predict they will be unable to adapt and survive. And which specimen do you recommend? Asked the counselor. On the screen, an image of John Miller appeared, as he sat in his cabin eating dinner while reading a book on his tablet. This one, said Zixtal. He works in what they call a national park. He appears to be in good physical condition, of average intelligence, and his job suggests he has more knowledge of natural environments than most humans. Yet he still relies heavily on technology. He will be perfect for our test. The council voted unanimously to approve the experiment. None of them considered how this decision would forever change their understanding of humanity. And John Miller, falling asleep in his comfortable bed, had no idea that tomorrow his life would be completely transformed. John Miller woke up to the sound of birds singing. But something felt wrong. The bed beneath him wasn't his comfortable mattress but hard ground. The air smelled different, wilder somehow. He opened his eyes and sat up quickly. He was in a forest, but not one he recognized. Tall trees with thick trunks surrounded him. The ground was covered with fallen leaves and small plants. This wasn't Yellowstone. The trees were different. The air felt different. Even the bird sounds were unfamiliar. "Hello?" John called out. Only the echo of his own voice answered him. He checked his pockets. His phone was gone. So were his keys, wallet, watch, and pocket knife. He wore only his ranger uniform with no equipment. What happened? Was there an accident? He wondered aloud. The last thing he remembered was going to sleep in his cabin. Now he was somewhere else entirely. Miles above, the Valaxian ship maintained its position. Commander Zixtel and his team watched John through their monitoring systems. "The subject has awakened," reported Officer Mechnar. "His vital signs show elevated stress, but he appears physically unharmed by the teleportation." "Good," said Zixtel. "Begin recording all data. We want complete documentation of how long a human can survive without technological assistance." On the planet's surface, John stood up and looked around. His ranger training kicked in. First rule of being lost: don't panic. Second rule: assess your situation. "I need to find water, shelter, and figure out where I am," he said to himself. John looked up at the sun. It was morning based on its position. He spotted a slight downward slope in the land and began walking in that direction. Water flows downhill, and following a water source could lead to civilization. "The human is moving with purpose," observed Niravex. "It appears to be using the sun for navigation." "A basic skill," said Commander Zixtal dismissively. "Many species can do this. Let's see how it handles more complex survival needs." After walking for about an hour, John found a small stream. He knelt beside it and looked carefully at the water. It was clear and moving steadily. Small fish swam in it. John cupped his hands and took a small sip. The water tasted clean. He drank more, knowing that hydration was essential. "Interesting," said Trelkon. "It tested the water before consuming it." "A primitive safety check," replied Zixtal. "But without purification technology, the human will likely become ill from microbial contamination." John stood up, feeling better. After drinking, he needed to find or build shelter next. Looking around, he spotted a large fallen tree with a space beneath it. This could be a good start. He gathered straight branches and leaned them against the fallen tree, creating a frame. Then he collected large leaves, pine needles, and moss to cover the frame. Within a few hours, he had built a simple but effective lean-to shelter. "The human is constructing a dwelling," noted Niravex with surprise, "without tools or building materials from its civilization." "A temporary solution at best," said Commander Zixtal. "Wait until nightfall or bad weather. Then we will see how effective this primitive shelter is." As afternoon approached, John focused on fire. He found a straight, dry stick and a flat piece of wood. He used the friction method he had learned in ranger training, spinning the stick rapidly between his palms against the wood. It took many attempts, his hands growing sore, but eventually a small ember appeared. He carefully transferred it to a nest of dry grass and blew gently. A small flame grew. "It has created fire!" exclaimed Trelkon in amazement. "Our simulations indicated only a 12% chance of success without tools." "Lucky coincidence," said Commander Zixtal, though he looked slightly impressed. By evening, John had a small fire burning near his shelter. He had found some berries he recognized as safe and caught a fish from the stream using a makeshift spear. It wasn't much, but he wouldn't go hungry tonight. As darkness fell, John sat by his fire, trying to make sense of his situation. "I don't know how I got here or where here is," he said quietly to himself. "But I'm going to survive this. Tomorrow I'll try to find signs of civilization or make some kind of signal." In the Valaxian ship, the scientists continued watching, already surprised by the humans' adaptability on just the first day of their experiment. John woke up as the first light of dawn filtered through the trees. His back was stiff from sleeping on the ground, but he felt rested enough. The fire had burned down to embers during the night. He added some dry twigs and blew gently until the flames returned. "Day 2, John said to himself. "Time to get organized." He knew that survival required more than just making it through one night. He needed a plan for the long term. The fire was his most important resource, so he built a small stone circle around it to contain the flames and added larger logs to keep it burning longer. In the Valaxian ship, the morning shift had taken over observation duties. The human appears to be improving its fire setup, reported a technician. It's using stones to create a boundary and conserve fuel. Niravex nodded. Basic fire management. Still, I'm surprised it maintained the flame overnight. Most test subjects from technological societies struggle with this task. John's next priority was food. He used a sharp stone to cut a long, straight branch which he sharpened at one end to make a better fishing spear. At the stream, he stood perfectly still in the shallow water, waiting patiently. When a fish swam close, his spear struck quickly. After several attempts, he caught 3 medium-sized fish. Impressive hunting technique, commented Trelkon. The human shows patience and good hand-eye coordination. Commander Zixtal entered the observation room. Any signs of distress or failure? None yet, Commander, replied Niravex. In fact, the subject is showing remarkable adaptability. It's already improving its tools. John cleaned the fish using the sharp stone and cooked them over the fire. While eating, he made mental notes of his surroundings. He needed to map the area in his mind. After finishing his meal, he gathered large leaves and used charcoal from the fire to draw a simple map of what he had seen so far: the stream, his shelter, and notable landmarks. The human is creating a navigational aid, observed Trelkon. Without electronics or precision instruments, such a map will be highly inaccurate, said Commander Zixtal. John decided to explore further, but wanted to make sure he could find his way back. He collected stones and placed them in noticeable patterns as he walked, marking his trail. He discovered a small clearing with fruit trees and berry bushes. Using his shirt as a makeshift bag, he collected as much as he could carry. It's employing breadcrumb navigation, said Niravex, a primitive but effective method for maintaining orientation in unfamiliar territory. By afternoon, John had returned to his camp and begun improving his shelter. He wove branches together to create stronger walls and collected large leaves to make the roof more waterproof. He also dug a small trench around the shelter to redirect rain. The human appears to be preparing for adverse weather conditions, noted Trelkon. Yes, though it hasn't experienced any yet, replied Commander Zixtal. Perhaps we should accelerate our testing timeline. As evening approached, John worked on making storage containers from large pieces of bark. He needed ways to collect and store water and food. He also created a simple alarm system using small stones balanced on sticks around his camp perimeter. Any large animal or person crossing the boundary would knock them over, creating noise. The subject is showing foresight and planning skills, said Niravex. This contradicts our initial hypothesis about human dependency on technology. It's only been 2 days, Commander Zixtal reminded her. Many species can survive briefly without their technological comforts. The real test comes with time and increasing challenges. As darkness fell again, John sat by his fire, feeling more confident than the day before. He had food, water, an improved shelter, and the beginnings of a mental map of the area. Whatever had happened to him, however he had ended up here, he was determined to survive. Tomorrow I'll explore more and maybe find higher ground, he said to himself. There has to be a way to signal for help or find civilization. In the silence of the forest night, John didn't hear the quiet hum of the cloaked observation drones hovering above his camp, recording his every move for the fascinated aliens. On the 4th morning of John's ordeal, dark clouds gathered in the sky. The air felt heavy with moisture, and the birds had gone quiet. John looked up through the trees and frowned. Storm coming, he muttered to himself. Need to prepare. The Valaxian ship, Commander Zixtal entered the observation center with purpose in his stride. The human has adapted too easily to basic survival conditions, he announced. It's time to introduce our first controlled challenge. Prepare the weather modification system. Are you sure that's necessary, Commander? Asked Niravex. We're still gathering baseline data on natural adaptation. The Council expects results, replied Zixtal firmly. They want to know how humans respond to stress, not just comfortable survival. Below, John worked quickly to reinforce his shelter. He gathered extra firewood and stored it under a covering of large leaves to keep it dry. He dug drainage channels around his camp to direct water away from his sleeping area. Years of ranger training had taught him to respect the power of nature. As John finished his preparations, the temperature suddenly dropped. The wind picked up with unusual speed, bending the tops of the trees. Rain began to fall, first as light drops, then as a heavy downpour. Weather modification system activated, reported Officer Mechnar. Temperature decreased by 7 degrees, wind speed increased to 40 units, precipitation at maximum safe level. John hurried into his shelter. As the storm intensified, the wind howled through the trees and rain pounded against the forest floor. Despite his preparations, water began to seep through the roof of his shelter. "The human's dwelling is failing," observed Commander Zixtal with satisfaction. "Now, we'll see how it copes with discomfort and cold." John refused to panic. He quickly identified the weak spots in his roof and reinforced them with more layers of leaves and branches. He positioned bark containers to catch clean rainwater for drinking. When water began to pool on the ground, he used sticks to raise his sleeping area. "Remarkable adaptability," murmured Trelkon, the young researcher. "It's improving the structure during the crisis, not just enduring it." The storm continued for hours. The temperature dropped further, and John's hands began to shake from the cold. He kept his fire going by carefully feeding it the driest wood and sheltering it with his body from the wind that found its way into his shelter. "Its core temperature is dropping," reported Niravex, looking at the biological readings. "But still within safe limits. It's managing its energy expenditure efficiently." By evening, the storm had passed, but everything was wet and cold. John emerged from his shelter, soaked but alive. His first action was to check his fire. It had survived, though barely. He carefully built it back up, then went to collect the biao rainwater he had captured. "Look," said Trelkon, pointing to the monitor. "It's already thinking about resources, not just immediate comfort." John knew he needed to dry his clothes to prevent hypothermia. He built a simple rack near the fire and hung up his outer garments. While waiting for them to dry, he wrapped himself in large leaves for insulation. "Commander," said Niravex, "the human has maintained not only its life functions but also its organized approach to survival. Perhaps we should reconsider our assumptions." "One weather event proves nothing," replied Commander Zixtal. "Its technological dependency will show when it faces a true crisis." As if the universe heard his words, John let out a sudden cry of pain. While rebuilding part of his shelter, he had cut his hand deeply on a sharp stone. Blood flowed freely from the wound. "A significant injury," noted Commander Zixtal with interest. "Without medical technology, infection becomes likely. This may be the failure point we've been waiting for." John looked at the cut grimly. It was deep and would need attention. But instead of panicking, he walked purposefully into the forest, searching for specific plants he remembered from his training. He returned minutes later with several large leaves and some moss. He washed the wound in clean rainwater, then applied a poultice of chewed plants known for their antiseptic properties. He wrapped the wound with moss and secured it with strips of bark. "It's using biological materials as medical treatment," Trelkon said with undisguised admiration, "without any technological assistance." In the growing darkness, John tended his fire and examined his work for the day. Despite the storm and injury, he had survived. He had even gathered more resources and improved his shelter. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, he allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. 2 weeks had passed since John first woke up in the strange forest. His camp had grown into a small, organized living space. He had built a more permanent shelter with walls of woven branches and a roof that kept out rain. A stone-ringed fire pit stood at the center of his camp, with smoking racks for preserving meat and fish nearby. In the Valaxian ship, the observation team gathered for their daily review. The screens showed John as he worked on a new project, a bowl made from hardened clay he had found near the stream. "The human continues to thrive," reported Niravex. "His wound has healed without infection, and he's creating increasingly complex tools. Commander Zixtal frowned. This contradicts all our predictions. Humans are supposed to be dependent on their technology. Perhaps our understanding of humans was flawed, suggested Trelcon carefully. No, said Zixtal firmly. We haven't pushed him far enough. It's time to test his mental resilience, not just physical survival skills. Back on Earth, John placed the clay bowl near his fire to harden it. He had been keeping track of days by making notches on a stick. 14 notches. 2 weeks alone, in the wilderness. Someone must be looking for me by now, John said to himself. He often talked aloud, finding that it helped keep his mind sharp. The Park Service wouldn't just forget about a missing ranger. As night fell, John sat by his fire eating a dinner of roasted fish and wild berries. Suddenly, he heard something strange. A distant, eerie howling that seemed to echo from all directions at once. It wasn't a wolf or any animal he recognized. In the ship, Officer Mechnar adjusted controls on a panel. Sound projection system activated, Commander. The frequency is designed to cause unease in humans without creating immediate panic. Good, replied Zixtal. Let's see how it handles psychological stress. The strange sounds continued through the night, making it difficult for John to sleep. When he finally dozed off, his dreams were troubled. He saw shapes moving in the darkness just beyond his fire's light. Morning brought silence again, but John felt tired and on edge. He went about his routine, checking his water supply, gathering more wood for the fire, and setting traps for small game. But the strange sounds had affected him more than he wanted to admit. Is this monitoring system picking up any mental deterioration? Commander Zixtal asked. Niravek studied the readings. His stress hormones are elevated, and his sleep patterns were disrupted. But cognitive function remains strong. He's still problem-solving effectively. That day, as John worked on improving his hunting tools, the sounds returned, louder and seeming to come from closer by. He stopped his work and listened carefully. This isn't natural, he muttered. For the first time, he began to wonder if he was truly alone in the forest. The thought was both hopeful and frightening. The human suspect's external influence, reported Trelcon. It's making connections we didn't anticipate. That night, the sounds became even more disturbing. John found it impossible to sleep. He sat up, staring into the darkness beyond his fire. Doubt and loneliness began to creep into his mind. Will I ever get home? He whispered. Am I going to die out here alone? In the ship, Commander Zixtal watched with satisfaction. Finally, we're seeing the emotional breakdown we expected. Humans require social connection. It's their weakness. But then John did something unexpected. He took a deep breath and began to sing. It was an old hiking song he had learned years ago. His voice was rough, but determined. When he finished singing, he spoke aloud again. My name is John Miller. I'm a park ranger from Yellowstone. I'm alive and I'm going to stay alive, one day at a time. He picked up a stick and added another notch to his calendar. Then he gathered materials and began creating something new. A small, doll-like figure made from twigs and leaves. What is it doing now? Asked Commander Zixtal. It appears to be creating a representation of another human, replied Niravek with surprise. A companion of sorts. John placed the crude figure near his fire. There, he said. Now I'm not alone. And tomorrow, we're going to explore that ridge to the east. Might see something useful from up there. The Valaxian scientists exchanged glances. The human was creating imaginary social connections to maintain mental health, a solution none of them had predicted. Remarkable adaptation, whispered Trelcon. It's finding ways to meet all its needs, even the non-physical ones. Commander Zixtal scowled. This experiment was not proceeding as expected. It was time to introduce a truly serious challenge. John woke to the sound of a twig snapping nearby. His eyes opened instantly, all senses alert. Something was moving around his camp. In the dim morning light, he could see a large shadow at the edge of the clearing. He remained perfectly still, controlling his breathing. Years of ranger training had taught him to respect wild animals and understand their behavior. After a moment, he slowly reached for a sturdy stick he kept beside his sleeping area. In the Valaxian ship, Commander Zixtal watched with cold interest as the large, wolf-like creature prowled near John's camp. The animal wasn't native to Earth. It had been carefully selected from the Valaxian biological database and transported to the test area during the night. "Is this safe, Commander?" asked Trelkon with concern. "This predator could seriously injure or kill the human. We've modified its aggression levels," replied Zixtal. "It will threaten but not immediately attack. We want to observe the human's response to danger, not necessarily cause harm." The creature stepped into the clearing, and John got his first clear look at it. It resembled a wolf, but was larger with unusual markings he had never seen before. Its eyes glowed slightly in the dim light. John knew immediately this was no ordinary animal. "Easy now," John said in a low, calm voice as he slowly stood up. He kept the stick in his hand but didn't raise it threateningly. The wolf creature growled, showing long, sharp teeth. It took another step forward, muscles tensed to spring. John knew running would trigger the predator's chase instinct. Instead, he made himself appear larger by stretching his arms out and stood his ground. He shouted loudly and banged his stick against a nearby tree. "The human is using intimidation techniques," noted Niravex. "It's attempting to establish dominance. Rather than flee." The creature hesitated, surprised by John's aggressive display. It growled again but took a small step back. John continued to hold his ground, maintaining eye contact with the animal. Slowly, he reached down and grabbed a burning branch from his fire. He waved it toward the creature, the flames creating a moving barrier between them. "It's using fire as a weapon," said Trelkon, "a tool-assisted defense strategy." The standoff continued for several minutes. The creature paced back and forth, looking for an opening, while John maintained his defensive position. Finally, the animal turned and retreated into the forest, though John could still hear it moving in the underbrush nearby. "Subject has successfully deterred the immediate threat," reported Officer Meknar. "But the predator remains in the vicinity." John knew the animal might return. He needed better protection. Working quickly, he gathered sharp stones and tied them to the ends of strong sticks using strips of bark, creating several spears. He also built a simple alarm system by stringing together shells and small stones that would rattle if anything approached his camp. "The human is creating defensive tools," observed Niravex, "not just for immediate use but in preparation for future encounters." As John worked, he kept alert for any sign of the strange wolf's return. By midday, he had finished his weapons and strengthened the walls of his shelter. He collected extra firewood, knowing that fire would be his best defense during the night. Late in the afternoon, a sound from his alarm system warned him that something was coming. John grabbed his strongest spear and moved to a defensive position. The wolf creature emerged from the trees, this time moving with clear hunting intent. "It's attacking now," said Commander Zixtal. "Let's see how the human handles a direct threat." The creature charged forward with frightening speed. John held his ground until the last possible moment, then stepped aside while thrusting his spear. The sharp stone tip grazed the animal's shoulder, drawing blood. The creature yelped in pain and turned for another attack. John stood ready, spear held firmly in both hands. When the wolf lunged again, he managed to dodge most of the attack, though the creature's claws caught his arm, leaving 3 long scratches. The battle continued, with John using his intelligence and tools against the animal's natural weapons. Finally, John saw an opening and thrust his spear with all his strength. The point struck deep into the creature's shoulder. The wounded animal backed away, growling in pain and fury. John had a clear opportunity to finish it off with another thrust, but instead, he held his position, spear ready, but not advancing. "Interesting," murmured Trelkon. "It could kill the predator, but chooses not to." After a tense moment, the injured creature retreated into the forest, leaving a trail of blood. John watched it go, then carefully treated his own wounds with medicinal plants he had gathered. In the ship, Commander Zixtal frowned deeply. "The human continues to exceed all expectations. It's time to consult with the High Council about the final test." A month had passed since John's arrival in the strange forest. His camp had become a small, efficient homestead. He had built a sturdy hut with walls of interwoven branches and a waterproof roof. Stone tools lined the walls, and strips of dried meat hung from the ceiling. Outside, a garden of edible plants grew in neat rows. In the Valaxian ship, Commander Zixtal addressed the High Council members who appeared as holographic images around the command center. "The human has survived far longer than our models predicted," Zixtal reported. "It has demonstrated remarkable adaptability and problem-solving abilities." The High Counselor, an elderly Valaxian with deeply lined blue skin, leaned forward. "Then your original hypothesis was incorrect, Commander. Perhaps humans are not as dependent on technology as we assumed." "With respect, Counselor, I disagree," replied Zixtal. "We haven't pushed this human to its true breaking point. I recommend implementing the final test protocol." The council members exchanged concerned glances. The final test was rarely approved due to its intensity. "Very well," said the High Counselor reluctantly, "but this will be the conclusion of the experiment regardless of outcome." On Earth, John was returning to his camp after checking his traps in the forest. He carried 2 rabbits and a collection of berries. Life was still hard, but he had found a rhythm to his days. The wounds from his fight with the wolf creature had healed well, leaving only faint scars on his arm. As he approached his camp, John noticed a strange smell in the air. Smoke, but not from his controlled fire pit. He dropped his food and ran toward his shelter. In the distance, he could see flames rising above the trees. "Fire!" he shouted, though there was no one to hear him. In the ship, Officer Mechnar operated the environmental controls. "Simulated forest fire initiated, Commander. Wind patterns adjusted to direct the flames toward the human settlement." "Excellent," said Commander Zixtal. "Now we'll see how it handles the destruction of everything it has built." John raced back to his camp, but the fire was spreading with unnatural speed. Driven by a strong wind, the flames had already reached his garden and were approaching his shelter. He knew he couldn't save everything. Making quick decisions, John grabbed his most important tools, some dried food, and the water containers. The small figure he had made as a companion weeks ago was still sitting by his fire pit. Almost without thinking, he tucked it into his pocket. Just as John grabbed his spear, a burning branch fell from above, striking his leg. He cried out in pain as it burned through his pants and seared his skin. Limping badly, he moved away from the camp, watching as the flames consumed his shelter and everything he had built over the past month. "The human is injured," reported Niravex, monitoring John's vital signs. "Burns to the right leg, possible muscle damage. And it has lost all its created tools and shelter," added Commander Zixtal with satisfaction. "Now we'll see the true limits of human endurance." John stumbled away from the fire, heading toward the stream. The pain in his leg was intense and he could feel himself growing weaker. The smoke made it hard to breathe. When he finally reached the water, he collapsed on the bank, his head spinning from pain and exhaustion. For the first time since arriving, in this strange place, John felt true despair. Everything he had worked so hard to build was gone. He was injured with limited supplies and would have to start over entirely, if he could even manage it with his burned leg. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered, closing his eyes as the pain washed over him. In the ship, Commander Zixtal nodded with grim satisfaction. "There it is. The breaking point we've been waiting for." The human admits defeat. But Trelkon, watching John closely on the monitor, shook his head. "I'm not so certain, Commander. Look." On the screen, John had opened his eyes again. He pulled the small twig figure from his pocket and placed it on the ground beside him. "We're not done yet," John said to the figure, his voice hoarse but determined. "We survived before, we'll survive again." With trembling hands, he tore strips from his shirt and soaked them in the cool stream water. He carefully wrapped the burns on his leg, wincing at the pain but continuing methodically. "Remarkable," murmured Niravex. "Even now it continues to apply survival knowledge." As darkness fell, John had managed to create a small fire and a basic lean-to shelter near the stream. His movements were slow and pained, but his eyes showed fierce determination. He spoke aloud to himself, reciting a survival mantra: find water, build shelter, make fire, find food, one step at a time. Never give up. In the ship, the observation team watched in stunned silence as the human, despite everything they had thrown at him, refused to surrender to despair. 40 days had passed since the beginning of the experiment. In the main chamber of the Valaxian ship, the High Council had gathered in person rather than as holograms. They stood in a semicircle, watching the large screen that showed John as he worked on rebuilding his shelter. Despite his burned leg, which was healing slowly, John had once again established a functional camp. It was simpler than his previous setup, but he had managed to create new tools, set traps for food, and build a shelter that protected him from the elements. The results are conclusive, said the High Counselor, turning to face Commander Zixtal. This human has demonstrated exceptional resilience and adaptability, even without technology. Your hypothesis has been disproven. Commander Zixtal's face showed reluctant acceptance. Yes, Counselor. I acknowledge that my assessment of human dependency was incorrect. What do you recommend we do now? Asked the Counselor Trelcon, who had been invited to the meeting due to his insights during the experiment, stepped forward. I believe we should make contact. We have learned much from this human. Perhaps he can teach us more directly. The council voted, and the decision was unanimous. It was time to end the experiment and reveal themselves to John. On Earth, John sat beside his small fire, cooking a fish he had caught that morning. His legs still hurt, but he could walk without too much difficulty now. He had adapted to his new reality and was planning for the long term, thinking about how to preserve food for winter and create better tools for hunting. Suddenly, a bright light appeared in the clearing before him. John grabbed his spear, ready to defend himself, but froze in amazement as the light formed into 3 humanoid figures. They were tall and slender, with blue skin and large almond-shaped eyes. They wore silver suits that seemed to glow slightly. John Miller, spoke the central figure in perfect English. Do not be afraid. We mean you no harm. John stood his ground, spear still raised. Who are you? What do you want? My name is Niravex, said the alien. These are my colleagues, Trelcon and Commander Zixtal. We are from a planet you would call Valaxia. You're aliens? John asked, lowering his spear slightly but remaining cautious. Yes. We have been observing you for the past 40 days. John's eyes widened as understanding dawned. You did this to me? The wolf creature, the storm, the fire, that was all you? Commander Zixtal stepped forward. Yes. It was an experiment to test human resilience without technology. We believed your species was entirely dependent on your machines. You have proven otherwise. John was silent for a long moment, processing this information. Then anger flashed in his eyes. You took me from my home. You put me through all this for an experiment? Trelcon spoke gently. We did. And for that, we offer our sincere apology. We have learned much from you, John Miller. You have shown us that humanity possesses strengths we did not understand. Our civilization has relied on technology for so long that many of us have lost the ability to adapt without it, explained Niravex. Your demonstration of survival skills, problem-solving, and mental resilience has been educational. John looked at each of the aliens in turn. So what happens now? Do I get to go home? Of course, said Niravex. We will return you to your cabin in Yellowstone. No time has passed there since we took you. But first, we would like to offer you something. Commander Zixtal stepped forward. John Miller, we invite you to be the first human ambassador to the Valaxian Confederation. Your species will eventually join the galactic community. You could help prepare the way. John looked around at his simple camp, at all he had built with his bare hands, and then back at the advanced beings before him. He smiled slowly. I'll consider your offer, but first I want to go home, take a hot shower, and sleep in a real bed. The aliens nodded in understanding. Niravex raised a small device, and bright light surrounded them all. 3 months later, John Miller stood before the United Nations Security Council with 3 blue-skinned aliens beside him. The room was filled with world leaders, scientists, and military officials all staring in wonder. "Ladies and gentlemen," John began, "I'd like to introduce representatives from the Valaxian Confederation. They've come with an important message. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology. It's our ability to endure without it." In the back of the room, a screen activated, showing footage of a single human surviving against all odds in the wilderness. The day aliens saw a human endure without technology had changed how they viewed our entire species.